Hello, my name is Marilyn Murray. I'm taking Honors Humanities with Dr. Dixon, and this is my presentation of the life of a samurai warrior. I'll start my presentation with what the word samurai actually means. It means to serve. This group of men here in this picture were all of the last samurai that was left in 1868 before they transitioned into a military, um, more of a modern defense system. For hundreds of years, Japanese lived in more of a traditional setting and they hadn't advanced with technology. But what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit more about the actual samurai. The things I learned when I did my research is these guys were very educated and extremely intelligent. They studied many, many different art forms because they felt like when you learned how to arrange flowers or learn the art of calligraphy, that it helped your mental state to focus, and focus is something you needed whenever you were dealing in war and using weaponry. They had no fear of dying. In fact, if they died in battle, that was considered an honor. So in the beginning, the emperor needed men that were not only agile in fighting, but also that were kind of big, tough guys that were intimidating to go out and collect taxes. So this is where the samurai originally got their start at, is they were kind of like tax collectors in modern day. They would go out and bring back rice or money or what other items that the emperor had requested, and they would do it safely and in a timely manner. Now, as you can see, this was the customary dress for samurai here. This gentleman, he is covered from foot to head, and what he's wearing there, that's actually leathers. Even though it does look like it's metal in the picture, they were very, very heavy leathers to withstand being hit by a sword. His helmet had large horns on it, and they did that for intimidation to make them look very scary. And they even had leather gear that come over their face to protect their face to make them look even more dangerous. In this picture, you can see he has his long sword with him, and there's also a smaller sword in his side there and a fan. They used so many different items for weapons, including a fan, and that's why they were so intimidating to people and they came across very dangerous. Here is a picture of the emperor and empress of Japan, and this is what the samurai served. They basically served and did anything that they needed for them. And if samurai were married and had a wife and child, they would stay at the castle as hostages, just so the samurai did stay loyal to the emperor and empress. They were very well taken care of, and the samurai had their own code of ethics that they followed. They called it the Bushido. There were seven virtues of Bushido that the samurai followed, and I'll read these to you. Integrity, respect, heroic courage, honor, compassion, honesty and sincerity, duty and loyalty. And this was almost a religious belief of the samurai. And what they had done, they had kind of mixed the religions of Buddhism with Confucianism, and the two together gave them this code of virtue that every samurai was to follow. Now, during my research, something that really surprised me is that women were also samurai. Um, I know in a lot of the older Japanese movies I watched with Bruce Lee, I've seen fighting styles where women were in it and they were very good fighters. But what they did is basically while the men were out fighting a war, the woman was responsible for taking care of the children, keeping up their home and their farm. And then if anyone would come in to attack, they were supposed to defend the farm, and they would do that. Everyone in the family could fight. So I thought that was kind of a really neat aspect of the samurai family itself. And during my research, one of the most dangerous samurais that I come across was a woman, and her name was Tomo Gozen. She not only was considered one of the most beautiful women that ever existed. They talked about her hair being beautiful and long, and her skin was like porcelain, and she was just an absolutely beautiful woman. Um, but she was one of the fiercest warriors they ever had. People were terrified of her. And one time, and there's a story that goes that one time a man grabbed her and ripped her sleeve, and it was a dress her husband had bought for her, so she beheaded him. She was so angry and took the head back as like a prize so her husband can see what she did. But I thought that was a really interesting point that there was a lot of female samurai. They don't depict those in movies or in really a lot of modern day things when you think of a samurai. This very stoic gentleman sitting here is a samurai, and this is kind of more of a day-to-day look that they would have had if you'd have seen them out. Now, something kind of neat about this is if you saw a gentleman with the two swords carrying those, that was considered a status symbol. Only the samurai were allowed to openly carry weapons from a day-to-day perspective. So here he wears the two swords, and I want to talk about those. The long sword was called a battle katana, and that's what he would use if he was in battle, trying to fight someone, or actually just practicing to become a better swordsman. Then the small one was called the wakakajaji, and honestly, it had more meaning because what they used it for is beheading of an honored opponent. So if they killed someone, they would use a smaller sword to cut the head off. And it was in honor of that opponent because it meant that they were a good fighter. They fought with integrity. And then also the smaller sword was something that was used to take one's own life in an honored suicide called seppuku. And that I'll get into in a few minutes, but that was also something else that the smaller sword was used for. A lot of people would ask what would bring someone to kill themselves. But in the Japanese tradition, seppuku was a ritual suicide. And the way they would do that is they would use a small sword, stick it into the left side of the abdomen, run it across to the right, then pull it straight up for actually so you can disembowel yourself. They thought the soul of a person lived in the smaller intestines, and that's why they did this. Seppuku was usually when they performed this, they would have family and friends around. They'd even have a best friend that was standing near them or beside them that would have their sword with them so that if they couldn't finish doing the disembowelment of themselves, the friend would help them out and cut their head off. Um, but even when they cut the head off due to family being around and them wanting to be modest, they would cut just three-fourths of the head off, leaving the head still attached so it wouldn't roll around for the family to see. Um, Dying this way was an honor. It was also a way to restore your honor if you had done something that was considered not appropriate to the samurai way. Now, in this slide, sometimes the samurai would go rogue, and when a samurai went rogue, that means you've now created a ninja. These were basically guys that fought like samurai, but they fought very dirty. They had all kinds of tricks up their sleeves, but they were known for their assassinations. They were known for murdering people, and basically they were kind of like a gun for hire back in the time. Um, Overlords, if they wanted a property or something or land or the financial gain of someone that was a samurai, they'd fight dirty. And what they would do is they would send in a ninja to assassinate that person and then take all their property and financial gains. You won't read about it a lot because since it was such a dirty way to obtain your land, you're not going to read about someone doing that. But they did. It did happen. And something kind of fun too. If you'll look at the top picture, there is a ninja hiding, and then the bottom one, there he is. So see if you can find the ninja in that picture. A samurai's love life was probably not what you'll expect. Um, Kind of one of the first rules they're taught is to always sleep with your sword. And rule number two is to never, ever trust your wife. And the reason why is because most of these marriages were politically arrangements. And politics are always changing, and so can the loyalty between the wife and the husband. So this is kind of how their married life was. And digging deeper into what love was for samurai, really they're taught is that the love between two warriors is what real love was. Um, and during that time period in Japanese culture, there was no such thing as homosexuality or even bisexuality. Like that wasn't even a word in their vocabulary or even a concept. It was just considered very normal for warriors to love each other because they all followed the same honor system of the Bushido. So that's kind of where their love was. Once in a while, they would marry a woman that they did love, but that was such a rare occasion that the brotherhood was just a lot more tighter than it was between a husband and wife. So the beginning of the end for the samurai, that really started in the 1850s when America landed there in Japan, and we had something called guns and gunpowder, and they didn't really understand that whole concept because they had been living so traditionally and were kind of years and years behind the times. So, whenever the trade deal started, Japan realized that they really had to move up with the times, that the samurai was no longer going to cut it and they needed a military to continue on and be prosperous. So, they started something in 1868 called the Honorable Restoration. And what that literally did, it was the end of the samurai. And that means they had to give up their homes, their lands, everything they had, and they began the military armies. Even though the end of the samurai happened, in modern days, all of those teachings and lessons of the Bushido are still lived by the Japanese people in their everyday life. They teach compassion, integrity, they bow for respect. All of these older traditions have lived through the Japanese people up to modern times. In conclusion of this research I did, the samurai really were the backbone of the Japanese culture. Um, the code they lived by, and it was everything they ever did from living to fighting to dying. Uh, they expressed all those virtues in their codes. And the Japanese people today, they still live by these codes, and it brings great integrity and honor for them to do so. The culture of honor can be rooted back to the samurai, and it's so culturally embedded from their past, their present, and probably into their future. I hope you have liked this presentation. I hope you've learned some about the samurai warriors, maybe some things you didn't know, and hopefully it will spark your curiosity to learn even more. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.